Here's what nobody prepares you for. You step on the scale and the number hasn't changed. Maybe it's even gone down, but your jeans don't fit. Your shirts pull across the middle in a way they never did. You look in the mirror and you don't recognize where your body decided to put the weight because it isn't where it used to go. And while this is happening to tens of millions of women across the United States, Canada, and the UK, researchers kept documenting something that didn't fit the pattern. Women in Okinawa, Japan, women across the rural Mediterranean. Women in these populations were moving through menopause without the abdominal fat shift that Western medicine treats as basically inevitable. Same age, same hormonal transition, dramatically different outcomes. And when the research teams compared the diets, the difference wasn't subtle. In several cases, the women gaining visceral fat were eating the exact opposite of the women who weren't. Everything I'm sharing today comes from peer-reviewed studies, randomized trials, systematic reviews, measurable outcomes in real postmenopausal women. This is educational, not a substitute for individualized medical care. If you have a diagnosed metabolic condition or you're currently on medication, please work with your doctor before making changes. Today I'm walking you through 5 specific foods the research connects to reduced visceral fat in postmenopausal women. For each one, I'm going to show you the food most women in this age group eat instead, the opposite choice, and why the data suggests that opposite choice is actively feeding the problem. But before I give you the list, you need to understand what's actually happening in your body. Because without the mechanism, you're just following instructions. With it, you can make your own decisions for the rest of your life. If this kind of evidence-based women's health research is useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps me keep producing it. No pressure, just appreciated. So, your doctor probably told you something like, your metabolism slows down after menopause, so you gain weight around the middle. And that is technically accurate in the same way that telling someone their house is on fire because it's hot inside is technically accurate. And it describes the surface. It tells you nothing about what's actually burning or how to stop it. Here's what's actually happening. 4 specific mechanisms. I'm going to name each one because when we get to the foods, every single food maps back to one of these. If you understand the mechanism, the food choice becomes obvious. The first mechanism, the traffic controller. Before menopause, estrogen actively routed fat storage toward your hips, thighs, and subcutaneous tissue. The fat under your skin, the fat you can pinch, the fat that is metabolically relatively harmless. Estrogen did this by suppressing the activity of an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase in abdominal fat cells while keeping it active in gluteal and femoral fat cells. Picture a traffic controller standing at a busy intersection. On every fat molecule arriving in the bloodstream is a delivery truck, and the controller is directing every single one of them toward the hips and thighs. Not because the trucks want to go there, because the controller is routing them. After menopause, the traffic controller walks off the job. Without the routing signal, fat molecules deposit wherever the path of least resistance leads. And in the absence of estrogen's suppressive effect on abdominal lipoprotein lipase, that path leads straight into the visceral cavity, around your liver, around your intestines, around your kidneys. And here's the part that makes this more than cosmetic. Visceral fat is not passive storage, it's metabolically active tissue. It behaves more like a rogue endocrine organ than a fat deposit. It secretes inflammatory cytokines. It disrupts insulin signaling. One, it actively makes everything else worse. This is why you can weigh exactly what you weighed at 45 and look completely different at 55. The total hasn't changed. The location has. And the location is what kills you. The second mechanism, the smoldering building. Estrogen was one of the most potent anti-inflammatory agents in your entire body. It suppressed NF-kappa B, the master switch of inflammation. It promoted anti-inflammatory cytokines. It protected blood vessel walls. And it did all of this quietly, automatically, around the clock, in every tissue. After menopause, that protection is gone. And what shows up in the blood work? Exactly what you'd expect. Interleukin-6 goes up. TNF-alpha goes up. C-reactive protein goes up. The chemical fingerprints of a body that just lost its primary fire marshal. Think of it this way. Well, estrogen was the fire marshal who walked the building every hour catching sparks before they became fires. When the fire marshal retires, the sparks don't stop. They accumulate. The building develops a low-grade smolder that wasn't there before. Now here's the connection to belly fat that almost nobody explains. Visceral fat and inflammation form a vicious feedback loop. Inflammation promotes visceral fat storage. Visceral fat secretes more inflammatory cytokines, which promotes more visceral fat storage, which produces more inflammation. That loop is the reason calorie counting alone doesn't solve this. You can eat at a deficit and still accumulate visceral fat if the inflammatory environment is driving the storage signal. Breaking that loop isn't a nice to have, it's the central biological target. The third mechanism, with the broken tide. Estrogen kept your blood sugar stable, predictable, well-regulated. It improved insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. After menopause, insulin resistance increases measurably. A 2019 review in Diabetes and Metabolism journal documented that post-menopausal women show higher fasting insulin, higher HOMA-IR scores, and greater blood sugar volatility than pre-menopausal women of the same weight and activity level. Think of blood sugar regulation like ocean tides. Estrogen was the gravitational force keeping the tides smooth and predictable. After menopause, that gravitational anchor weakens. The tides become erratic. Blood sugar surges higher, crashes lower. Each surge triggers an insulin spike. And insulin's message to fat cells is unambiguous: store. The fat cells that respond most aggressively to that message, and the abdominal ones, because the traffic controller is gone, and the default destination is the visceral cavity. So now you have three systems feeding each other: no routing signal, chronic inflammation, insulin volatility, and they all converge on the same anatomical location. The fourth mechanism, the recycling plant. This is the one almost nobody talks about. Your gut microbiome contains a specific subset of bacteria that produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. This enzyme takes estrogens the liver has already processed for excretion and reactivates them, recycling them back into circulation. Scientists call this subset of bacteria the estrobolome. It's essentially a hormone recycling system. In a post-menopausal woman producing near zero estrogen from the ovaries, this recycling system becomes disproportionately important. But whatever residual estrogenic activity is still available, from adrenal glands, from fat tissue conversion, from dietary phytoestrogens, the estrobolome determines how much of it actually gets used versus thrown away. And here's the problem. Menopause itself changes the gut microbiome. Bacterial diversity drops. Key strains decline. The recycling plant starts running on fumes at precisely the moment your body needs it, running at full capacity. What fuels the recycling plant? Fiber, fermented foods, diverse plant matter. What shuts it down? Ultra-processed food, refined sugar, low dietary diversity. Most women over 55 are consuming less than half the fiber intake the research associates with a functional post-menopausal microbiome. The recycling plant is starving. Those four mechanisms, the traffic controller, the smoldering building, the broken tide, and the recycling plant, are not separate problems. They're one interconnected system. And the 5 foods I'm about to walk you through each target a different piece of that system. But here's what makes this video different from the usual list. For each food, I'm going to show you the food that most women in this age group eat instead, the common choice, the default. And in several cases, the research suggests that default isn't just missing the benefit, it's actively amplifying the problem. Before I get to the foods, one thing directly: no single food melts belly fat. I use that word in the title because you wouldn't have clicked otherwise, and I'd rather you hear the real science than not hear it at all. The honest truth is that specific dietary patterns shift the hormonal and inflammatory environment in ways that measurably reduce visceral fat accumulation over months. Not overnight, not from one meal. This is a trajectory change, not a magic trick. But the trajectory change is real, and the evidence behind it is substantial. Food number 1. Fatty fish. Wild-caught salmon, mackerel, sardines. This goes directly at the smoldering building. A meta-analysis of 14 randomized controlled trials examining omega-3 fatty acid intake in post-menopausal women found significant reductions in triglycerides and measurable drops in CRP and IL-6. Those are the exact inflammatory markers driving the visceral fat feedback loop. Reduce those markers and you weaken the signal-telling abdominal fat cells to keep accumulating. Now, but here's the piece that makes fatty fish specifically relevant and not just generally healthy. Omega-3s improve the ratio between two hormones you've probably never heard of, adiponectin and leptin. Adiponectin tells the body to burn fat and improve insulin sensitivity. Leptin governs satiety and, when functioning properly, discourages visceral accumulation. After menopause, that ratio shifts against you. Omega-3s from fatty fish help shift it back, 2 to 3 servings per week. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring, low mercury, high EPA and DHA. Sardines, by the way, are absurdly underrated. They're eaten whole, including the small soft bones, so they deliver calcium alongside the omega-3s. For postmenopausal bone health, that's 2 benefits from 1 tin. Now, the opposite. What most women eat instead: lean chicken breast. Women in this age group were raised in the low-fat era. The message they absorbed in their 20s and 30s, and that many still carry, is that fat is the enemy. Lean is healthy. Skinless is smart. So they reach for chicken breast, turkey, or they skip substantial protein entirely because somewhere in the back of their mind, eating fat still feels like a mistake. Chicken breast is fine food. I have nothing against it, but it contains functionally 0 omega-3 fatty acids. If your primary protein source 3 to 5 nights a week is lean poultry, you are getting the protein and missing entirely the anti-inflammatory compound your postmenopausal metabolism is actually desperate for. You're eating dinner without addressing the mechanism. The women in the Mediterranean studies weren't eating skinless chicken breast. Yeah, they were eating sardines and mackerel and whole fish cooked in olive oil. The fat was the point, not the thing to avoid. If you're on blood thinners like warfarin, Eliquis, or Xarelto, very high-dose omega-3 supplementation can increase bleeding risk. Whole food fish at 2 to 3 servings per week is generally safe, but mention changes to your prescriber if you're on anticoagulant therapy. Food number 2, fermented soy, tempeh, miso, natto. This one targets the traffic controller, the routing signal that disappeared. The WAVES trial, published in the journal Menopause, followed postmenopausal women on a plant-based diet with daily whole soy. Across 2 phases, moderate to severe hot flashes dropped by 79 to 88%. That trial measured vasomotor symptoms, not belly fat specifically, but the mechanism is the same. Soy isoflavones, primarily genistein and didzine, are structurally similar enough to estradiol that they can bind to estrogen receptors. They have a strong affinity for estrogen receptor beta sites, which sit in the tissues that govern fat distribution, vascular health, and metabolic regulation. Now, they are not estrogen. They bind at roughly 1,000th of estradiol's potency. Before menopause, when your estrogen receptors were fully occupied by the real thing, isoflavones were essentially irrelevant. But after menopause, with the receptors sitting empty, a skeleton key that fits 1,000th as well as the original key suddenly matters, because there are no original keys left. It's not a replacement for the traffic controller. It's a partial substitute dispatcher, handling some of the routing that estrogen used to manage. Fermented soy, specifically, tempeh, miso, natto, has an advantage over unfermented forms. Fermentation predigests the isoflavones and improves bioavailability. It also introduces bacterial strains that support the estrobolome, the gut recycling system from mechanism 4. Now, the opposite. What most women eat instead? Nothing. They avoid soy entirely. This might be the single most damaging nutrition myth still circulating in women's health spaces. Millions of women avoid soy because at some point someone told them it messes with your hormones or increases breast cancer risk. That fear became a rule, and that rule has gone unchallenged for a decade in many women's minds. The North American Menopause Society considers soy in food form to be generally safe for most women, including most breast cancer survivors. When the phytoestrogens in soy are not pharmaceutical estrogen, they behave differently at the receptor level. Conflating the two is like saying a house key and a car key are the same thing because they're both keys. Women avoiding soy out of fear are removing one of the very few foods that partially mimics the fat distribution signal estrogen used to provide. The traffic controller left. Soy isoflavones are the closest thing to a substitute, and the women who need them most are actively avoiding them. One caveat that matters. Women with a history of hormone receptor-positive breast cancer or who are currently taking tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors should have this conversation with their oncologist before significantly increasing soy intake. That's individualized. It doesn't belong in a general recommendation. And if you take levothyroxine for thyroid conditions, soy can impair absorption. Separate your medication from soy-containing meals by at least 4 hours. Food number 3. Extra virgin olive oil. This goes after the smoldering building from a different angle than fish. The PREDIME trial is one of the largest and most rigorous dietary intervention trials ever conducted. A sub-study specifically examining post-menopausal women found that those following a Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil as their primary fat showed reduced CRP, reduced IL-6, improved insulin sensitivity, and better metabolic markers across the board compared to controls. The compound doing much of this work has a name, oleocanthal. It inhibits cyclooxygenase enzymes, the same pathway that ibuprofen targets, the same pathway that aspirin targets. Except you're not taking a pill, you're dressing a salad, and you're doing it every day, which means the anti-inflammatory effect is constant, low-grade, and cumulative. 2 to 4 tablespoons daily, used as your primary cooking and dressing fat, replacing other oils and butter. One word matters here: extra virgin. Regular olive oil, light olive oil, pure olive oil, these are refined products with dramatically lower polyphenol content. The evidence for oleocanthal's anti-inflammatory effect comes from extra virgin. It does not transfer to the bottle that says light on the label. Now, the opposite. What most women eat instead: seed oils and cooking sprays. Women trying to cut calories reach for canola oil, sunflower oil, vegetable oil blends, or those zero-calorie cooking sprays. The logic seems airtight. Less fat, fewer calories, to less belly fat. But the omega-6 fatty acid profile in most seed oils, consumed at the levels typical of Western diets, promotes exactly the inflammatory signaling you're trying to suppress. IL-6 up, CRP up. The smoldering building smolders harder. You're not saving yourself from belly fat by cutting calories with spray oil. You're removing the anti-inflammatory compound and replacing it with a pro-inflammatory one. The calorie math looks better on a label. The metabolic math is worse inside your body. One note on the calorie concern because it's legitimate. Olive oil is calorie dense. The approach isn't to add olive oil on top of everything else. It's to replace other fats with it. Butter becomes olive oil. Canola becomes olive oil. Cooking spray becomes a tablespoon in the pan. The total fat grams may not change much. Numb the inflammatory profile of those grams changes completely. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover evidence-based women's health research every week. 2 more foods to go, and the last one is going to make a lot of women angry at their grocery store. Food number 4, cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. This one hits two mechanisms at once: the recycling plant and the traffic controller. Cruciferous vegetables contain two compounds that matter specifically after menopause. The first is DIM, diindolylmethane, which supports the way your body metabolizes and clears estrogen and estrogen-like compounds. The second is sulforaphane, with documented anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. But the mechanism I want you to pay attention to here is fiber, because this is where the numbers get hard to ignore. A study published in Obesity found that for every 10-gram increase in daily soluble fiber intake, visceral fat accumulation decreased by 3.7% over 5 years, from fiber alone, independent of any other dietary change, not total body weight, visceral fat specifically. Cruciferous vegetables are dense with soluble fiber. They feed the gut bacteria that run the estrobolome. They provide the DIM that supports estrogen clearance. In a post-menopausal woman whose recycling plant is running on fumes and whose traffic controller is gone, cruciferous vegetables are addressing both problems on the same plate. Now, the opposite. What most women eat instead: starchy sides. When women in this age group build a dinner plate, the side is often white rice, or bread, or a baked potato, or pasta. These fill the same space on the plate where cruciferous vegetables could be, but they deliver a completely different metabolic signal. Refined carbohydrates spike blood glucose. The spike triggers an insulin surge. Insulin tells abdominal fat cells to open the doors and store. You're feeding the broken tide mechanism with every forkful. Meanwhile, the Brussels sprouts you didn't order would have delivered soluble fiber to feed the recycling plant, DIM to support estrogen metabolism, and sulforaphane to reduce inflammation, all without the glucose spike. This is not about eliminating carbohydrates from your life. It's about one specific swap: the broccoli instead of the second helping of rice, the roasted cauliflower instead of the bread roll. That trade delivers the fiber your estrobolome is starving for and removes a glucose spike your body can no longer handle the way it used to. Food number 5, full-fat Greek yogurt, or kefir. This addresses the recycling plant and the smoldering building together. Full-fat fermented dairy delivers a specific combination of things post-menopausal women need in one food: probiotics, including Lactobacillus gasseri, a strain specifically linked to visceral fat reduction in clinical studies; conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, with documented anti-inflammatory properties; calcium in a form your body can actually absorb; and vitamin K2, which directs calcium toward your bones instead of allowing it to deposit in your arteries, a distinction that matters enormously after 50. And the fat itself is functional. Fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K require dietary fat to be absorbed. Remove the fat from the yogurt and you reduce your body's ability to absorb the very nutrients that make yogurt worth eating. Now the opposite: what most women eat instead: fat-free yogurt. This one should make you angry. The fat-free yogurt aisle is a monument to 1990s diet culture. It exists because 30 years ago, the nutrition establishment told women that dietary fat made you fat, and millions of women believed it, and many still do. Fat-free yogurt strips out the CLA, strips out the vehicle for vitamin absorption, strips out the satiety signal that fat provides. And what does the manufacturer add back to replace the flavor the fat carried? Sugar, often quite a lot of it, so you get less of the anti-inflammatory compound, worse absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, and reduced satiety so you eat more later, and a blood sugar spike from the added sweetener. You've taken a food that was working for your post-menopausal metabolism and surgically removed everything that made it work. Millions of women reach for that container every single week, believing they're making the healthy choice because the label says fat-free in large, confident letters. The label is not lying. It's just answering a question that was never the right question to ask. If you can't tolerate dairy, kefir is often better because fermentation breaks down much of the lactose. If dairy is completely off the table, a high-quality probiotic with documented strains and a separate vitamin K2 supplement can partially replicate the benefit. The food matrix is always preferable to isolated supplements, but something is better than nothing. Your body after menopause is not betraying you. It's responding to a specific, predictable hormonal shift through pathways that are well mapped and well understood. The women in Okinawa and the Mediterranean aren't lucky. They're eating in alignment with the biology. The information has been sitting in the research for years. It just hasn't reached the people who need it. If this topic is relevant to you, my video on post-menopausal inflammation and cardiovascular risk goes deeper into the second mechanism we discussed today. It's one of the most dangerous and least discussed consequences of the menopausal transition, and it connects directly to the dietary patterns we covered here. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway or the question I didn't answer. I read every single one. Your questions are what guide what I research next. Keep investigating your health. I'll see you in the next one.